How to make, or how I made, a dovetail humidor. Let's get into it. I started by selecting some interesting pieces of air-dried red oak. Then I roughed out the dimensions of all the pieces for the dovetail box. Before taking them to the jointer and planer to get them square. With all the pieces laid out, I glued up the pieces that would make the top and bottom panels of the box. Then cut the side pieces down to size, 2 15-inch pieces and 2 10-inch pieces respectively. Before starting on the dovetail cuts, I aligned and marked the corners that would connect. Then I measured the width of the boards and the greatest width between the prongs of the jig that would fit within the board's width. Took the difference of those two measurements and divided by 2 to find the points at which I would align the piece in the jig so the outermost pins on either side of each end would be almost identical. Then, using the depth of the boards as my guide, marked the line to define the depth of the router bit. Starting with the dovetail bit, I made my cuts. Then, flipping the jig around and swapping for the straight bit, I made the mirroring cuts on the 2 remaining boards. With a good dry fit, I collected my cured top and bottom panels and gave everything a finishing level sand down. After that, I clamped the pieces together to get the exact interior dimensions of the box. Then used those and a little bit of benchtop math to cut the dimensions for the top and bottom panels. With the panels in shape, I used the table saw set to a 1/4 inch below the surface to cut a tongue on every edge, then cleaned up the tongue with the chisel. Then, on the visible edge of the top panel, added a chamfer. To fit the tongue, I then used the trim router to cut out grooves towards the tops and bottoms of every side piece. Making sure not to cut all the way to the ends to avoid ruining my dovetail joints. With all the pieces ready, it was time for glue up. Stinking glue eater. Once the box secured, I used a trimming bit to tidy up the dovetail overhang. Then, with the table saw set about 1/16 of an inch lower than the depth of the boards, I cut a recess 1.5 inches from the top that, after a bit of hand sawing, would become the lid. Once the lid was freed from the box, I used a chisel to clean up the vestiges of the handsaw. Then used some sawdust and wood glue to fill some of the cracks in my joints. While that cured, I turned to cutting the recesses for the hinges. I started by marking the placement. Then, using the router and a fine gouge bit, cleared most of the recesses on the box side before cleaning up the lines with the chisel. With the hardware dry fit, I placed the box lid on top and used the blade edge to mark the alignment for the lid recesses. Then went through the same process to clear the way for the other side of the hardware. With all the cuts and imperfections filled, I gave everything another finishing level sand down. Before applying the first oil finish. While the oil cured, I got to work on the cedar inserts, firstly by squaring the pieces. Because they needed to be so thin, about 1/4 inch, and were made from a coniferous tree, after getting them all squared and dimensioned, I stacked and prepped the pieces, and then let them rest a few days before attempting to make shapes with them. Once well rested, I cut them down to size to fit the interior faces of the box. To customize the humidor, in one of the cedar pieces, I hand-carved some meaningful script. The other customized piece was a simple divider that I made with the bandsaw. Once all the cuts were in, I sanded down all the pieces and used a bit of oil to clog up the end grain to help with moisture loss and gain. Once those were prepped and the oil had cured, I turned back to the red oak box and applied a few layers of polyurethane as a protective shield. Then, after roughing up the surface for a better adhesion, glued the cedar pieces into place. You can see that the cedar sidewall of the box sits just below the rim, while the sidewalls of the lid sit just above it. This is to create a better seal and help maintain the humidity. With most of the cedar in place, I anxiously got to work cutting the recesses for the magnet anchors for both the humidifier and hydrometer. With those in, I finished up the rest of the cedar lining. Then got to work anchoring the hardware into place. With those in, the last piece I need to show you is this cute walnut handle. After cutting and marking the center of my blank, I used the lathe to quickly turn the cylinders for both the handle piece and the tenons that would anchor them to the box. I decided to add a little aesthetic and texture with the parting tool. Then use the bandsaw to cut off the excess of the little handles. I made an extra just in case. One final sand for the handle front. Then it was time for finish. To install, I simply found the center of the lid face, then cut a 3/8 inch mortise with the Forstner bit and super glued the handle into place. And that's a wrap. I ended up making a few of these with some different versions of cedar inserts. These were pretty fun, so if you're interested in getting one made to order, check out the link in the description.